Peru is rich with pre-Columbian history. While many are familiar with the Incas, few have heard of the Chachapoya. High in the Andean rainforest, the people known as the Cloud Warriors were absorbed into the Inca Empire.
The incorporation of the Chachapoya territory was a bloody process.
Without written records, scientists must study their grave sites and their mummies for clues about the people themselves.
This is the big gap that we have in pre-European history in the continent.
When you see a mummy, you see the best connection you can make to a person that was living 1,000, 5,000, or 10,000 years ago.
Now, archaeologists and geneticists are uncovering surprising details about one of the most mysterious civilizations in the Americas. Who were the Chachapoya people? And why did they vanish? Between the steep gorges of the Peruvian Andes and the rainforests of Amazonas, scientists search for clues about an enigmatic people called the Chachapoya. The cloud forest where they lived is often called the Ceja de Selva, or eyebrow of the jungle. It's also where they buried their dead. High on the cliffs of Carahia, overlooking the Utcubamba Valley, are 6 figures, placed there over 500 years ago. They are Puru Manchu, the Cloud People's most impressive sarcophagi, and each contains human remains.
You still have the original, almost intact sarcophagi that are still incastonated in the slope of the mountain. Because these ones are so inaccessible, they remained there, sort of dominating the valley.
The Puru Manchu stood guard to ward off evil and to gaze upon their living relatives in the valley below.
So they would have placed them in the slope of the mountain, and they would have destroyed the path to reach their position so that now you cannot go there anymore.
They were installed nearly 9,000 feet up a vertical rock face, sometimes painted with red, white, yellow, and black pigments. A 7th sarcophagus toppled off the cliff during an earthquake in 1928. Built from a mix of clay, straw, and mud mortar that was spread over cane stalks. Each protects bones and other relics. The dead were found in fetal positions, wrapped in cotton blankets and facing forward. Many other Chachapoya grave sites and cemeteries are hidden within the caves in the region.
Every crevice, every small alcove or cave in this area has human remains.
Bioarchaeologist Dr. Sonia Guillen is the world expert on the Chachapoya culture. She's the director and founder of a nonprofit center in Lema Bamba, built to house the ancient remains that her team has recovered outside Carahia and throughout the Chachapoya landscape.
We try to remove as many of the mummies, remains, skeletons, isolated bones that had been placed and had been left.
Now in the Centro Malki Museum, they sit together like a lost tribe, eternally silent, but speaking volumes to the archaeologists who study them.
We are showing evidence of our history. We are showing evidence of how people lived and who they were. But the emotional part, the connecting part is very personal. Otherwise, I would say it's better for these remains to be left untouched.
The Chachapoya were skilled embalmers.
The soft tissue is removed through the decay process, through animals, through time, and eventually they put together the bones, the nails, the hair, and wrap it up and put it into a package, and they put it in a special cemetery area, in a special burial site.
The final stages of the mummification process were left to the cold, dry climate, which helped to preserve the remains.
The way they prepared the deceased, the way where they placed them, the way they wrapped them, the way they were presented with elements of their daily life and offerings indicates that they had a connection to their ancestors, and they were visited, they were treated, they were not only remembered, but they were maintained in their daily life as ancestors.
Radiocarbon dating places the mummy bundles in the late 15th century, shortly before the Spanish conquered the Incas. Before that, the Incas did their best to conquer the Cloud Warriors. The Chachapoya rebelled for many years, but the Incas eventually overpowered them. Many were forced to resettle in other parts of the vast Incan territory. When the Spanish arrived in 1532 on their quest to subdue the mighty Incan Empire, some Chachapoya joined them to exact revenge on the bloodthirsty Inca.
They were really interested in an association with people that would help them defeat the Inca.
The Spanish conquistadors created the first written records of the Chachapoya. That's why, except for the mummies, much of what we know about the people comes from their buildings, which were unlike those of the Incas.
There's a characteristic of the very classic stone masonry, and the Chachapoya is quite different in the way they finished the stone they worked with, and how they decided they would decorate their buildings and what their buildings were for.
60 miles from Carahia is a mountain citadel that archaeologists call Cuelap. Cuelap is the Chachapoya's stronghold in the mountains. Not only was it built centuries before better known Machu Picchu, it's the largest ancient stone structure in the Americas. Cuelap remains exactly as it's been for the past 500 years.
The Chachapoya architecture is embedded in the landscape so well that it's really part of the landscape. We can interpret that it served the function of both an urban center and a fortification.
Cuelap consists of over 550 structures, and archaeologists believe that the city may have had a population close to 4,000. The magnitude of construction seems to indicate the existence of a unified pre-Inca Chachapoya kingdom.
When they faced the Inca occupation or attempts of the Inca to conquer them, they had to reunite to be stronger against them. And this is the point where we start to see more of a Chachapoya unity.
The pre-contact people of Amazonas and the Andes created spectacular structures without the tools we take for granted.
They also didn't have the wheel. If you think of something is missing, but they developed such a complex culture that they could build impressive monumental buildings.
Vast stretches of forested terrain still remains unexplored by scientists. Today, archaeologists strive to document Chachapoya settlements and cliff tombs prior to the arrival of the Spanish. But adventure tourists and looters were rapidly destroying the archaeological record. The scientists want to answer the biggest question of all: who were the Chachapoya? Spanish records reported that some were tall, fair-skinned, with blonde hair, and other pre-Inca cultures left tantalizing clues. But the experts don't agree.
We don't have any reason to think that they were physically different from their neighbors. It's an effect of the early Spanish chronicles.
Maybe their skin was not as dark, but it's probably that coastal people were not as dark as people coming from the Titicaca basins.
Dr. Chiara Barbieri analyzes the ancestry of people living in the modern town of Chachapoyas, many of whom can claim ancestry to the ancient warriors.
We use genetics as a tool to measure relatedness between people. Not only that, but to access some of the past demographic history of a region. We study the genetic diversity of the people of today, and we are also looking at the genetic diversity of their ancestors, of the people from whom they inherited the DNA.
By analyzing the genomes of 119 people who currently live in the region, Chiara found that a high indigenous component remained in their DNA. She supplemented the analysis with family histories over generations.
And so we would go from person to person, giving us some information, telling us more about the history, or directly by being an anonymous DNA participant in the DNA survey.
She found that some genetic profiles in modern-day Chachapoyas were not found anywhere else, even in other Andean regions.
Possibly they are the descendants of the Chachapoya people.
Further evidence that the mighty cloud warriors didn't disappear completely is found in the language spoken in the modern-day town of Chachapoyas.
Their language was possibly this mysterious language Chacha, but this might have still persisted until today. We call it a linguistic substrate. The way that the people speak today is influenced by the way that their parents were speaking and their grandparents were speaking. It's something that we can think of like having an accent.
And the reach of the ancient Chachapoya people may have been wider than some scholars thought.
The Chachapoya did not only live in the cloud forest. There were populations from this Chachapoya time that lived in valleys, that live in higher altitudes, and so forth. So the people that still live in the Amazonas region, they can call themselves descendants of these ancient societies.
People living in Amazonas today wish to preserve their heritage.
All around the region there is a clear knowledge of the richness of the past. So everybody who lives there knows about the ancient Chachapoya, and it's part of their heritage, I would say.
Sonia and Chiara still have much more to investigate and more discoveries to make.
The only way to link the genetic diversity of the people who live today in Chachapoyas to the ancient Chachapoya people is by taking the DNA of the Chachapoya people. So maybe in the future we will have some DNA that comes from the mummies, and then we will be able to make the direct link with the past.